call this meeting to order for August 7, 2024. Second thing is roll call here. So Amber, Michael, either one of you.
So, sorry. Chair Fan is absent. Randy Goodman?
Here.
Nicole Kennedy?
Here.
Vice Chair Rocha?
Here.
Luther Kraxberger?
Here.
Anthony Teeters?
Here.
And Arnold Urias is out as well.
All right, perfect. Thanks for that. We will go to item 3A under discussion and action items, approval of the minutes from the July 3rd, 2024 Workforce Housing Committee meeting.
So I apologize on the agenda. I had just sent out the agenda, not the full agenda packet. So if we need to push this one until September, we can do that. Just for everybody to have time to review.
It was lengthy too. So you guys are good with that to push out these approving the minutes for next time? Do we not have, we don't have another microphone for all them over there?
We do.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. He's like, yeah. Yeah. Okay. We'll go to item 3B then, appointment of chair and vice chair. Do you guys want to expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, so per the resolution, you have to appoint a new chair or vice chair. You can appoint the same people, but it's up to you. I did talk to Mike Fan. If he is nominated, he said he would like someone else to take a turn just so everybody gets to try it, but he's willing to take it if he's nominated. All right, so at this point, we can open it up for nominations for chair.
I nominate John for chair.
Second. Awesome.
All right. All vote.
For chair, you want
Yeah.
vote at a time?
Let's do one at a time.
Okay. So a motion, well, why don't you say the motion? It's not on me.
I motion for John to serve as chair for the upcoming term.
Second.
All right.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And then any nominations for vice chair?
I nominate Nicole for vice chair.
Second.
All right. Do you accept the nomination?
Yes. I will.
Okay. Any opposed? All four?
Yep.
All right. That was easy. Now we're going to open it up to our Public Works Director, Gwen Rowich, to talk about a couple different topics. Impact fees, water policy, and the Prescott Unified School District project and how we partnered with them. And then this is a good time for anybody to ask questions that you guys have about those topics specifically.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I just got a very general list of things you wanted me to talk about. So if I'm not talking about the things you want me to, please interrupt me, ask me questions as we go along. I'll try to tell you what I know from the history of, I've been here for 18 years in the city, so worked on a lot of different projects. Impact fees specifically, this is my third time adopting impact fees with the city. I've been in various roles as part of the process, but the process is the same every time. Impact fees are heavily regulated by Arizona revised statutes. The city's hands are tied down pretty good as to how we can collect them, what we can collect them for, how soon we have to spend the money, how we have to spend the money, how we have to track the money when we collect it, and what the monies can be used for. So that part of Arizona revised statutes is 9-463.05. You can read that. I Googled it yesterday. It came right up because I was like, I should probably refresh that a little bit, right? It's highly regulated, impact fees are. Essentially, the short message is they're used to help support infrastructure and community needs associated with growth. So they can't be used to replace aging infrastructure. They can't be used to replace infrastructure that's not sufficient for the folks that are already here. They have to be used for new homes, new people coming into the area. So it's restricted that way. Some of the other restrictions with impact fees are the monies that we collect are supported by what's called an infrastructure improvement plan. So in public works, we primarily deal with water and wastewater impact fees, although we also, in the last round, adopted some street impact fees for street improvements. Utility impact fees have to be spent within 15 years of the time they're collected unless they're debt serviced. If we have to get a loan to build them, then we can collect the fee for as long as the debt service exists. So that's in the state statute. For non-utility impact fees, when we collect them, they have to be spent within 10 years of collecting them. Impact fees are assessed at the time of a building permit. There is only one exception to that rule. It's in a different section of statute, 900-.5, which says that if you have a development agreement, you can agree to collect the impact fee prior to issuing a certificate of occupancy for the project, but you have to do it within 15 days of issuing a C of O. We chose to exercise that option when Touchmark built their first buildings up on top of Lee Boulevard. So that's the only project that I'm aware of where we collected it at the end. Generally, we collect impact fees at the time we issue a building permit. Some other things about impact fees are that they cannot be waived. I know that's probably hard to hear based on the mission of this group, but impact fees have to be tracked in a separate account. They're audited separately under the state law. The city has entered into agreements to pay the impact fees for specific projects over the years when they've shown it to be an economic development benefit to the city long-term. And in those cases, the city transferred money from other funds, like the general fund, the water fund, to pay the impact fees that they agreed to pay on behalf of the developer as an economic incentive. But impact fees cannot be waived. Those are some of the high-level things about impact fees. I'm happy to answer questions you have about impact fees. Yes.
I think I already know the answer, but they can't be reduced as well?
They cannot be changed. Once they're adopted, that is the fee, until such time as the city adopts a different fee. And we do update impact fees every 5 years. That's what we're doing right now. And that's why the fees change over time. There are some fees that go down. For example, the water resource fee. That fee has gone down over time because the only thing it pays for now is the debt service on the Big Chino Water Ranch. That wasn't always true in the past, so the water resource fee has fluctuated over time, and the other fees, there are actually there are 4 development impact fees on the utility side. They are based on the infrastructure improvement plan. So as the city outlines its 5-year capital needs, right, and some of those things in the 5-year capital needs are based on contractual obligations we have in development agreements and other agreements, right? Like with the tribe and with other entities. If we have contractual obligations, those go into our 5-year capital program. And that's some of what's driving impact fees to be a little bit higher in this round are some of the contractual obligations that we have.
So this is like big infrastructure items, like the new wastewater treatment plant. It's not like the actual infrastructure in a new development.
So any infrastructure within a development, so if you're building South Ranch, if you're building Peregrine Ridge, if you're building in any of these, within the development, the developer has to build his own infrastructure. The things that the city will often partner with the developer on in a development agreement have direct benefit to the city. So those would be off-site things, major trunk infrastructure, improving or expanding the wastewater treatment plant, right? Those sorts of things. That's what impact fees are generally collected for. Yeah, it's never to directly benefit that development.
Right.
There's always a city benefit to any infrastructure that the city agrees to build as part of a development agreement.
Gwen, do you happen to know the Arizona Revised Statutes language? Is that similar to most states around the country, or does it really vary from state to state?
I would have to ask Matt that.
It varies from state
I
to
would
state.
assume it varies.
Highly
Yeah.
specific to Arizona.
I have a couple questions. So, you guys good? All right. Gwen, thanks for being here, by the way, answering all these questions. Does the infrastructure improvement plan include employment staff expenses?
So under the state law, it cannot include employees.
Okay. So the
So
impact
it's
fees,
for actual infrastructure, right? So
the physical.
that's kind of that's the conundrum with police and fire, is they can build buildings, but then how do they pay for policemen and firemen? Because you cannot use impact fees to pay for personnel. You can only use it to pay for infrastructure.
Gotcha. Okay. So the material and labor involved with the physical infrastructure is what it
Yes.
essentially goes to. Okay.
Yes, and like in the case of police and fire, it pays for vehicles. It pays for, a new fire truck is $250,000, last time we bought one. So it can pay for vehicles, but it cannot pay for people or benefits associated with people.
Gotcha. Okay. And this might be more of in the legal realm here, but you brought it up here it's come up several times about waiving impact fees. So I think we got the message pretty clearly that we cannot waive them, but you mentioned in some instances the city can agree to pay them if there is an obvious and grand value, I guess, to the city. Can they be deferred?
As I said previously, they can only be deferred until 15 days after a CO
Okay.
is issued on a project. That's the longest they can be deferred as
Wow.
part of a project.
15 days post CFO?
Yep.
Wow.
With the fees, who decides where that money goes? Is that a council deal? In other words, do you buy a new fire engine or do you buy a new police car with that impact money? Who decides?
So the infrastructure improvement plan says what we will spend the money for. So when we are ready to build a project, we come to council, we tell them that it's paid partially from impact fees, partially from rates, right? So it would be most projects are paid from multiple funding sources. It depends on the particular project. But once it's in the infrastructure improvement plan, impact fees can be spent to purchase or build those particular things. Council still has to approve it as part of our procurement process. That's different from which funding source do we use to build a project. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sure.
You know, Randy, you and I are in the same business, and I have to tell you, for 40 years that I built, I hated impact fees. Now I'm on the other side of the road, and I'm looking at the finances. People have to understand that these impact fees are exactly what they are. They're to mitigate the impacts of growth. And it's sort of a thing, you pay me now or you pay me later. This money is assessed to the developer, the builder, and then it saves the community at large the tax dollars. So we either have the developer pay to mitigate the growth at that time, like she said, the permit, or the rest of us all end up having to pay. So the money is, like she said, it was reversed for a while. So the Arizona Home Builders Association, which you know is a very big lobbying group out of Maricopa County, they were successful in reversing some of the impact fees. But that didn't work out well. And so now we, here in the city of Prescott, we decided to not assess the adequate amount back in 2019, which contributed to where we are today in terms of our services, police and fire. So as much as I hated paying them, and you know, it goes to the bottom line, or the developer can choose to take it out of his profit. But it's got to be paid. And again, it's a pay me now or pay me later. So I look at the impacts of having, to the city of Prescott, not having raised that impact fee back in 2019 when the last 5-year go-around happened. So that was for the structural. That was for police and fire specifically. Water, wastewater, they did have a slight raise, I believe, but it was not even up to what the professionals, you know, we hire a company that comes in and does an assessment, and they're the recommending body, if you will, to how much we need to be able to assess and that we can assess legally. But I don't think they even raised the wastewater back in 2019. Is that right, Matt?
They raised it.
But not to what the suggested amount was from the Raf Tillis.
I'd have to look.
Yeah, I did.
But I can tell you that it went up.
Yeah, it did go up, but I don't think it was up to what they suggested. So anyway, here we are today with impact fees. And again, I don't like them either, but on the other side of the coin, when you get to take a deep dive into what happens, especially in a small community where we see everything, you can see how far behind we are just on the police and fire. That's the one that really took a hit. And so we've got to catch up now, because I've had a lot of developers call me and say, how come we're raising it 80%? It probably wouldn't have been 80% today had it been raised back in the 5-year cycle that it was supposed to be reviewed. And those numbers are all present. You can look that up in the history. You can request it from Sarah Sipe to take a look at what happened then. So there is a need for those. As far as, bringing the cost down on workforce housing, that's the city decision to be able to pay. They're going to have to pay them, but whether they choose or not to pay them for you, that's the whole thing. I mean,
Yep.
that's got to be decided among several people.
That's really wasn't what I was getting at. I know impact fees, I pretty much knew the answer to her, that I asked her the questions. But my brain's thinking full circle here. We got to reduce the cost to workforce. We're going to talk about it later in this meeting.
Yeah.
There is a deficit. It's there. Is there a way to collect the fee from the developer of a large workforce project and then turn around and use those impact fees by way of council's approval to help with infrastructure underground on that project?
Now, remember, these monies are dedicated solely. I mean, we can't transfer monies out of the structural impact fees into the wastewater. I think that's been
Yeah, the statute's pretty clear that
very clear.
they're segregated for a particular project, and that's how they'll be used. In regard to your question about council discretion, what we receive usually from our consultants is a maximum amount of an impact fee that we can legally justify. And then the council at that point has some discretion as to whether they want to go with that maximum high rate or if they want to go somewhere below that. That's where the discretion comes in at that point.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say here, guys, is that do we look at workforce as a benefit to the community, to the whole community? My simple brain says, yeah, because we need workforce. So if we collected work impact fees from the developer and turned around and used those fees to help with the underground infrastructure for that development, because it benefits the community by way of workforce. I know I'm stretching it here a little bit, but we got to think outside the box. Is that possible?
Probably not, but we can look into it. But I just think that that statute is so highly regulated that you are going to pay whatever it is suggested to be paid in the IIP, and getting beyond that, I just don't see how you get there that way. Now, there are other things we can look at, entering into a development agreement with a workforce housing construction developer. Or what are things we can do in regards to maybe helping them out? But I don't think using impact fees is going to get you there. But I think there are other creative solutions we can look at.
And Randy, as a council member, I can tell you if you're looking at the big picture, you're right, workforce housing is a complete need. But when you look at the data that was just produced through our fire chief, what is more of a need? Serving this city with police and fire services? I mean, we have to prioritize. We're not raining money. So if I'm guessing, and I don't know what they're all going to say, I know for me it's going to be a priority thing. Just is what it is.
I have a
Take
question.
a shot.
Yeah, that's okay.
I like that.
I have a question about just how the when you have your advisors that are recommending the impact fees and the adjustment to impact fees, are they taking into account the overall picture of what the city budget looks like? Is that part of the equation?
So the staff does. The staff recommends the projects that end up on the infrastructure improvement plan. And as I said, those are driven by every 5 years before we start the rate and fee and impact fee study, because we do them together. The 2 years prior to that, we spend updating our master plan for water and sewer infrastructure needs. In that book, we have hundreds of projects, right? There are hundreds of needs. Some of them go all the way to build out, but most of them are focused in the 5 and the 10-year window. And so even at a staff level, we have to prioritize which projects can we actually do, right? There might be 20 projects, but in reality, we only have so many staff. We only have so much water, or money that comes in through the collection of fees and the collection of rates to pay for projects. So we're prioritizing which projects in that master plan have to come first. Sometimes development agreement requirements come first. Sometimes failing infrastructure comes first, right? Things that are going to be upsized because they're undersized. Again, it can't replace things that are aging condition, but it can replace things that are undersized because new development is constantly adding to that, that burden on that pipeline. So the staff determines which projects go into the IIP based on what we can actually deliver, because again, we have to spend it in that 15-year window, right? If we don't, we have to pay it back, and we don't want to do that. So we're looking at what can we actually deliver, what can the fund actually pay for between the impact fees we anticipate to collect based on the issuance of building permit trends over time. We're looking at projections over time. And then what do the rates have to supplement? Because a lot of projects are paid for through rates and impact fees. Not all of them, but a good number of them. So we have to look at the impact to the ratepayer as well. It's a very complex evaluation of what's going to land on the infrastructure improvement plan, or we just call it the IIP.
Okay, so I guess furthering that question, let's just say the city was whole, like we were attracting that hotel development that didn't go through that would have been $1 million a year in revenue to the city. If we had more projects coming in that were overall giving us a healthier balance sheet, if you will, would that negate ultimately the need for such an increase in impact fees in the long run?
No, because impact fees are based on new growth. So if anything, if we were robust and we were booming with new houses and more businesses, we would probably need more impact fees because we'd have to build projects sooner to support that new growth. That's my opinion. It actually would work the opposite.
Gwen, given your expertise and longevity at the city, I mean, I guess it sounds like impact fees are kind of a moot point because they're very regulated.
Yeah.
Putting those aside, in light of workforce housing, is there anything that you see from your position as that could help out workforce housing aside from impact fees? Is there something, a hoop that everybody has to jump through, or a time scale that doesn't need to be met? Is there something that at the city level that could be removed or changed or accommodated differently for a workforce housing project?
So I would say the biggest benefit that you could get is to find a piece of property that already fronts infrastructure so that you don't have to pay for additional infrastructure that would just serve your project, right? It's similar to the conversation I had with the fire chief when he was looking for a place to put his new fire station. I said, if you go to a location that already has a signal, a location that already has water and sewer, that at least fronts the property, so all you have to build is maybe a small, and we'll talk about that when we get to the PUSD project, that all you have to do is a small water main extension or a small sewer main extension. That's going to save you a ton of time and a lot of expense, because now you don't have to hire engineers, you don't have to build underground infrastructure before you can go vertical. That's my number one recommendation, is that you find, if you're looking at infill, that you find places or you partner with a developer that is going to build that stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Right? That's the number one thing. The other thing is sometimes with projects, the city will waive other fees, like plan review fees, inspection fees, permit fees. We can waive other kinds of fees, but we can't waive impact fees.
Yeah, my question's more regulatory. So is there hoops that developers are having to jump through, or time things that's taking the development, 60 days to get through the city or 6 months to get through the city? Are there things in that process that could be taken off that would cause it to either go through faster, or are there timescales with the city that could be done you know, we don't have to jump through this hoop because it's a workforce housing project? Are there those kind of things on your end or the city engineer's end that could be, okay, we don't need to do this specific thing? And you don't have to answer it now.
Please don't take this in a negative way, but it would be irresponsible as a staff person to take things off the plate. So for example, if you're in a floodplain, we're going to look at the floodplain, whether
sure.
you're workforce housing or not. If you're in the WUI, fire's going to look at the WUI. That is responsible development, and even workforce housing should be seen as we checked all the because eventually you're hoping that people will live in these houses. We want to make sure they're safe. We want to make sure they have the same eye on them that any other project does. So in terms of the process, I would say there would be no steps to be skipped just because it's workforce housing.
Sure.
However,
I'm
could
not-
we expedite a review? We could do that. We could put you at the front of the line that could be an incentive. And when I get into some of my other comments, looking for incentives for developers to build workforce housing, that would be an incentive, is that we put them at the front of the line every time their permits or their plans came in, so that they don't have to wait until it's their turn to be reviewed. The time is money.
Yeah.
Time is money.
That's kind of
So
my
can we
point.
save them time? We could probably do that, but we could not skip. I wouldn't recommend skipping any steps in the
I'm not saying we
process.
skip things. I'm like, there's so many redundancies. So like if I go in for a new development and it goes through 4, 3, 6 rounds of review, that's 6 or 7 months. I can go in and submit for a PAC on a Thursday and get reviewed the next Thursday with inundated with 1,000 different comments. That's a week. That week costs me $1,000. The 6 months just cost me $300,000.
Sure.
So those are the kind of things. Is there a way to take a workforce housing project and say, hey, this is workforce housing. We're going to do an in-person review, a technical review, and say, here's your turnaround. We can do it in person. Back in the old days, you could just bring your plans in, get them redlined, that day and get your permit.
Tabletop reviews. that's
Tabletop review.
Absolutely an option.
Those are the kind of things that I'm talking about. Or it's,
And those kind of things we can do.
well, that's kind of what I'm asking.
If that's
is
the
like-
direction that council sets for staff, right? Because when we put you at the front of the line, somebody else, your 6 weeks turns into 7 weeks for your private project, right?
Sure.
So there are always consequent pros and cons, right? But yes, there are things we could do to help expedite those
And
kinds
that's
of
that's
things.
guys. My question is, what do you see as an expert, being here for 18 years,
Mm-hmm.
like aside from skipping stuff? What do you see? All right, Randy, you can have it now. Okay. Sorry.
Having the engineer of record at the table, having the architect at the table. Not everything is conveyed as well through the written word. Sometimes it's better to just talk to people. I mean, it's something I think we've lost in our society. A good conversation can get you way farther than a long letter, right? But our plan review process is fairly rigid, in that plans come in, written comments go out, but staff is always trying to be helpful. I've never met a more helpful staff than the one we have here. You just ask and they'll respond. It might not be the answer you want, but you will get a response.
I think I know where you're getting at. I'm half follow.
Am I not hitting the answers you're looking for? I don't know what else
Oh,
to
yeah.
say.
Go ahead, Randy.
Well, on a follow-up to that, I mean, simple things like water meters and sewer connection fees. Is that like impact fees, or is there room to wiggle on those? What bone can we throw a developer from the city side?
Well, the city can offer to pay impact fees. You can't waive them, as I said.
No,
but-
I know.
But the city can offer to pay impact fees for workforce housing. But I think, before you even look at that, have you defined what workforce housing is?
But specifically water meter and sewer connection, what can we do there?
With impact fees?
No, not impact fees, just the actual physical, the cost of a water meter, the cost of sewer connection.
To waive them? Council can waive a tapping fee. Council can waive the cost of the water meter. They can waive those kinds of fees if they chose to do that.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah.
There is the ability
The
to
only
do
fee
that.
they can't waive is impact fees.
Right.
Any other fee that we charge for development, the council has the ability to waive. If they adopt it, they have the ability to waive it.
Okay.
Yeah, on that note, actually, Gwen, can you expound a little bit on what for the sake of the public and even for us, let's just take a hypothetical project and we'll say it's just a, multifamily is kind of messy too, but let's say it's just a subdivision, right? Can you share with us what fees are associated with that project from a public works perspective? So like, for example, we hammered some of them, right? A water meter.
Yeah, so
A tap.
an engineering permit is required for any subdivision type project where it would be individual lot ownership, or even some condos require individual water meters for every single unit. So one of the options you could look at is a master meter, using a master meter in lieu of using a individual meters. That's something that could be asked for as part of a project that council could approve. There's pros and cons to that, though. Master impact fees are charged based on the size of the meter. So that would mean more upfront costs in terms of the master meter itself, right? Because if you go from individual 5/8 inch meters to one single 2-inch meter, it's like $150,000 in impact fees for a single 2-inch meter. So at the end of the day, that may not be the most cost-effective way to do it, but in the long run, a master meter has longer monthly rates associated with it based on volume charges, right? So there can be an advantage long-term if you're in it for the long haul, and it's, the code says it's only allowed under single ownership, but again, that can be waived by council if they feel that's a benefit to the project, using a master meter over a. Generally, we see those in rental situations, not ownership situations, because that can get a bit tricky under ownership situations.
Sure. Yeah, so what I'm getting at is, can you share what fees in this hypothetical situation of a subdivision where you say we're tapping for sewer, right? There's gonna be an extension of sewer lines,
Sure.
water mains, APS is relevant to you, but we're
Plan
doing.
review fees based on how many pages are in the plan
Yep.
set. There's inspection fees based on how many hours it takes us to go out and inspect the infrastructure. There are fees for the physical meter. There are fees, tax on the physical meter. There are, let's see what else. There's usually grading fees based on how many cubic yards of dirt you move. There's a plan review fee for the grading based on how many cubic yards of dirt you move. I can send you a list of all the fees, but those are the ones that come to the top of my mind.
Yeah,
Essentially, those are the fees that the city would charge you, right?
correct. Which in theory could be, the city could choose to waive, reduce. There's more flexibility with those fees, I guess is my point, than if the statutory
Yes.
regulated impact fees. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
there are tapping fees if you have to tap the
Sewer,
sewer
yeah.
main, if there's no sewer tap already, if there's no water tap, there are fees associated with that. If you don't have a meter box in the ground, right? The city will install one for you. It's generally cheaper for you to hire a contractor to do that, but if you'd like the city to do that, we'll quote you what it would cost us, and there's no upcharge to the city installing a box and yoke for a water meter. It just is whatever our actual cost is. But generally, a contractor can do that for you cheaper than the city can.
Okay. I think it would do wonders if you guys all agree that if we could get from Public Works a breakdown
Yeah.
of and I guess I know you need an actual kind of project to make sense of it, but I would say a residential subdivision project would probably be one that you can maybe break out all the fees associated with that, including impact fees, and just treat it as like, we'll treat it a phantom project and then put all those fees in there. Because right now we're just trying to also quantify what amounts are we talking about here, right? I know there's an increase that just is kind of going through the process right now, and we're trying to make sense of what is the cost per unit of an impact fee on a dwelling unit. If we could do that, and then we can do a multifamily of the one you're working on. I don't know if you've gotten that list yet.
Well, I was just going to suggest kind of the same thing. I'd like to invite her to come back if you guys are all in agreement and bring her fee charts with her. We can put them on the overhead and maybe really sort of examine where there might be more wiggle room in this versus that. So that we've kind of talked in general terms, but we really don't know what we're talking about, right? We talk about water meters and different things as a board, but I'd like to have her come back if you guys are in agreement and put it on the overhead and really look at them and really understand them and then say, okay, wait a minute, now that one right there, maybe we can do something with, this one we can't touch, that kind of thing. I don't know, how do you guys feel?
But I was thinking the exact same thing, but just speeding up the process to get it in an email, probably to all of us first. Like, just, you know what I mean? Just so we can actually already look at it early and not have to wait for the next meeting to actually review those things. I would like to review the fees, get a sense of how much money we're talking about. I know there's a lot of stuff online. Oh, you have it from like a
He's
project.
got it, yeah.
Yeah, but to get those fees and then kind of mull over on what we feel like we need to push and pull on
Exactly.
to be able to say, okay, I mean, because the skinny of it is, and Connie, just to piggyback on what you said, I 100% agree. Priority of public service, first responders, fires, all that stuff's important. But I guess to me, in my mind too, the correlation is like, yeah, we want to increase fire service. We can't do that without firefighters, and we can't do that without them living somewhere. So for me, it's just kind of like, yeah, I get that there's all these priorities that we have, the city has to focus on, but that's why we're here, is because most of those priorities can't be met, if you will, because of the lack of housing. So go ahead.
But let me tell you, from a builder standpoint, the way that you're going to be able to work with the city right now is whoever decides to step into this realm of workforce housing, you need to establish a template or a model. And I'm going to use this as a hypothetical analogy. Let's say you're going to do a small infill subdivision of 10 homes. Maybe within the 10 homes, you have 3 models. Get those plans into the city right now for review. So every time you regenerate that's the time savings that I'm talking about, because it's the same concept of the home of your own. In the county, they've got, 4 or 5, 6 projects that are already pre-approved because they've already been drawn, engineered. Nothing can change out of them, maybe some stone or, as opposed to siding on the outside. But if you get those plans through ComDev and then you go to repeat it, that could be a potential time savings in a development of 10 or 100. It doesn't really matter so long as you don't deviate from the plans that you have already submitted. It is that exact same comment. That's model as they have in the county, but that's your time savings. Think about it. If you had a template of a small subdivision, and it's already been approved in terms of your plans, and you want to regenerate that,
Those are,
it's going to save you the time. Yeah.
That's happening right now. I think John's getting to like, what incentive can we give the workforce housing? So we can go through that project on a development now.
But you need to get ComDev involved in this too, because we've asked for a list of the things that we would be potentially either reduced in price or maybe waived. It has nothing to do with impact fees
Sure.
at all. But when you're doing this, you need to produce a proposal. So once you get your plans and your bottom line, then you're going to come back to the city with a proposal. They may say no, that's the option, but at least that's the only way you're going to be able to figure out what pencils out and how. You really got to analyze these projects, because you've got to figure out where you're going to save money and where you can. Because remember, we already just established the building costs are what they are. I mean, obviously you're not going to put granite, you're going to put Formica. I mean, there's things that you guys are going to be able to arrange in your project to keep the bottom line where you need it to be. But it's going to be what it is in terms of building materials.
Well, so the water systems development impact fee is 4 times what the residential street impact fee is. It's, 20 times what the police impact fee is. So the impact fees are what the impact fees, but the police and fire and street are all fairly low. It's the water and wastewater that are pretty high. The rest of the stuff that I think we're looking at is like the building plan check residential over 14,000. That's a high one. The residential building permit, the permit's only 1/10 of what the actual cost is to the developer. So those kind of things, the mechanical, gas, electric, they're $80 here, $100 there, $1,000 there. And that's on a per house basis. On the development side, it's not that impactful because you can spread it over 30, 40, 100 homes. On the per house portion, that way you could target a development and say, hey, if you're going to put in 10 workforce housing, units, we're going to restrict those, and we'll figure out the metric to say that's what qualifies. But then the city could say, okay, well, these 10 will qualify for this other incentive. And that kind of incentivizes the developer to say, hey, I'm going to do those things for that development.
So it's twofold, right? So right now with Gwen, public works, engineering, all that stuff at like, say, a subdivision, right? That's going to have all its own plan, inspection fees, water meter, all that stuff. And then you're also looking at the single building unit house that you go in for a building permit on, and that would be a more ComDev question, right? Because I think, well, just to circle back, Gwen, so I can finish my thought on kind of the things that we would love to get from your department, is if you could take that residential lot subdivision of 10 lots, like Connie pointed out, and give us kind of the breakdown of what those fees would look like.
Yep.
And I also want to highlight the time frame part, right? You did mention there's ways, in your opinion, to maybe expedite projects. Is there a way that your staff can go back and say, okay, Glenn, this is the typical 10-lot subdivision timeline with current staff, based on the last 6 months or whatever. And then maybe this is one we did about a year ago or 2 years ago that was expedited for whatever reason. Just to get some sense of like, well, how much can we really gain or reduce, I guess, if you will, in time frame for reviews? Because you mentioned tabletop, in person, it would be, I think there's no doubt in our minds here as a committee that we would like to expedite anything related to workforce housing. So I think now it's just, that's a clear yes. It's just now understanding what is that time now from your department's perspective.
Sure,
Is that doable?
we can do that.
Could we do that with ComDev with the same similar vein of just essentially giving us the breakdown of, say, the building permit within this 10-lot subdivision on what that would look like? And then timeframes. Sorry, I don't know if I should be looking at Chelsea or George here. I guess whoever looks up first is who's going to own the task.
It was Mike.
Yeah, or Mike, that's true. Yeah, but if we can get that, Mike, I mean, if you could really orchestrate that, though, I think that's where the meat and potatoes is in this conversation, is to try to get, what are those fees? What are timeframes look like? Because I was going to ask you that, Gwen. That was my follow-up question, is like, well, what are those fees what are those fees going to look like now for a 1,500 square foot, 3-bed, 2-bath residential house? I mean, if you feel like you know that answer now, can you share it? Or
You mean, are you talking
these
about
new
impact fees?
impact fees? Yeah.
So a typical residential house under 1,800 square feet is going to come in around 19,000 for impact fees.
Okay.
That's for all 5 impact fees. That was in the presentation from the consultant that came up. We can send you those slides over if you like. He
I mean, I would
He did a
like-
sample or example of, a typical home under 1,800 square feet.
And that's, you mentioned total with all 5 types of impact.
All 5 impact
All
fees,
imp-
right, with a 5/8 inch meter. We don't, if the home is sprinklered, it requires a 1-inch meter in order to pump enough water for the sprinkler heads, but we don't charge impact fees for a 1-inch meter if the only reason they need it is the fire sprinklers. So we did the example based on a 5/8 inch meter for a typical home. If you have the bigger homes, like over 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, a lot of times the number of bathrooms and fixtures will drive a bigger meter, but most homes use a 5/8 inch meter.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I'm good with the impact fee side.
We beat that up pretty good, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, gosh.
We didn't mean to beat you up. I was
We
just-
beat
No, you're
that.
not beating up me,
that
but the
and then some.
topic, right?
Yeah.
Right, because it's a complicated topic.
It's big.
And you have a complicated mission, so I get it, right?
Okay, I'm sorry. I do have one last
One more question?
for legal. So has there ever been any legal audit of the statute regarding impact fees that the state would say, okay, these are all our rules about how you collect them and manage them and assess them and whatever, right? But in these situations, or these maybe a list of exclusions, are there any exclusions to say, okay, but if the city has some dire problem, like, I don't know, housing firefighters and police officers, could there not be any path for that city to have more flexibility with impact fees? Or is the state just like, nope, don't care?
I think it's the state, we don't care, but the fix is pick up the phone and call your legislative senator and assemblyman in Arizona and say, hey, we've got a statewide problem here. Why don't you take a look at your impact fee statute and see if you can carve out exceptions to things like workforce housing? That's the fix. I don't think there's anything in the statute that would allow for a challenge, a legal challenge or litigation to make that argument. The fix is going to be a legislative change.
Okay. And I didn't mean litigation either. I just meant more of an exclusions list, which is pretty typical, I would think of.
There are some exemptions, but they're specifically related to if your house burned down, you could rebuild it and not have. So
I see.
any situation where you're not creating additional demand, you could do that. But if you're going to create additional demand, the statute is clear that you have to pay the fee.
And it's back to the reason you have impact fees is this mantra that growth pays for growth. Growth pays for growth. Just always think growth pays for growth.
But remember, again, it's a pay me now or pay me later. So do you assess the developers that directly created the impact, or do you assess it to all the residents of Prescott? I mean, and by the way, I wanted to add to the 10-year thing has never been challenged, by the way, the repayment. But another good thing for you all to do would go back and look at the 2014 Enabling Act. I mean, this has been studied and challenged in court already. I mean, we went through this. In fact, this city had to reimburse impact fees at one point. And I don't know all the details to that, but it has been chewed up and spit back out. And, we're a small community here. You can imagine the impacts of growth to us as opposed to Phoenix. But here's the other thing, too, that this is exactly why infill. You really need to concentrate on infill because you're going to be, in the long run, be able to save some money if you're getting in a lot that's already got the water to it, sewer to it, and has a tap. That's a big savings right there.
Okay. All righty. Well, Gwen, if any other questions about impact fees from anybody? Everybody's good? All right. So we will, I guess, transition over to water policy. I'm assuming that's still you, Gwen.
So, as you know, water policy is talked about a lot, right? So before I start the discussion on what we could do with water policy, I think it's important to know how the city approves water and the different ways that we give water to development and how in priority of law those things take precedent over each other. And you can stop me anytime, Matt, that I'm speaking out of turn. But in our staffing, we teach our employees that if water is granted through a contractual obligation like a development agreement, an intergovernmental agreement with another agency or tribal entity, a written agreement that council approved, that takes precedent over everything. Doesn't matter what code says, it doesn't matter what policy says. If they have a contract, they get water under the terms of that particular contract. So in the case of some of the newer developments like AED and deep well areas, even Granite Dells Estates, Prescott Lakes, water was distributed to them under a contractual agreement, and it still is as they continue to develop. So water policy does not apply to them, and when we track water in terms of permits coming through, we track them separately. They are not subject to water policy. After contractual obligations, we enforce city code. So anything that's been codified, adopted by council through ordinance or resolution, things such as if you want to attach to water, you have to connect to sewer, right? There are rules in Chapter 2, 2-1-76 talks about if your property fronts a sewer main and you want to connect to water, you are mandated to connect to sewer. It's not an option. You have to connect to it if it fronts your property. So those kinds of rules are the next level of how we enforce whether you're allowed to have water or you're not allowed to have water. After that, we go to water policy. So I think it's important to understand that water policy is not necessarily applied to every person that comes and asks for water, nor is it applied to every project that comes and asks for water. When it comes to water policy, it's a fairly simple process in terms of you fill out an application. If your water demands exceed the administrative approval threshold, which is 1.5 acre feet for a project, then you have to go in front of the Water Issues Subcommittee and the council for approval of your project. Homes that come in 1 or 2 at a time are well below that threshold. 8 single-family residences are below that particular threshold. So if one of your project is less than 8 single-family residents, it would be administratively approved as part of the building permit process and can save you a lot of time and delays in terms of going in front of the Water Issues Subcommittee and the City Council. Yes.
Would it be possible to say if there's a developer coming in with a 20-unit subdivision and it's all workforce housing, could it fall under the same 8-unit automatic approval process?
I knew you would ask me, what are the ways we can go through policy faster? And that is something that this committee could recommend to council, that they add a new policy that's related to workforce housing, right? That says if you're building workforce housing, you can have up to this many units that would not have to go before the Water Issues Subcommittee and the council. That's certainly a recommendation you could make to, save a lot of time. Unless you fall below the administrative threshold, you are obligated to go through this 2-step process that I've described, and it generally takes about 2 months. And that's once your application has come in. I will tell you that if a subdivision plat came in, right, like you were trying to build a little subdivision, the water would generally follow the parallel path with the plat, right? So you wouldn't have a lot of savings time there. But if you were to find an infill parcel where you were going to build a few homes together and it didn't require a subdivision review, again, that's ComDev, that's not really my world, you could bypass the Water Issues Subcommittee and the council and get an administrative approval. And that information is in our policy. It talks about the administrative threshold of 1.5 acre feet per year is the exception. Council recently raised that from 1 acre foot to 1.5. So that was, good for the small infill projects, and we do see quite a few of those coming through. The other suggestion that I would make is that you could possibly ask council to modify city code to mandate that a certain percentage of any subdivision of a certain size have a minimum amount of workforce housing. But you have to define what it is. You have to give staff those guidelines so that we can look at a project and say, yes, it checks this box, it checks this box, and this box, it's workforce housing, right? Council has a water budget. The budget doesn't necessarily distinguish between workforce and something else. It has in the past. There has been allocations specifically set aside for workforce in the past. We never used them because no one could ever define what it was and prove that it would meet a workforce housing need. So even though they set it aside, they had this same kind of guiding principle that you do. They couldn't define what it was. And unless you can specifically give guidance as to what workforce housing looks like, it would be difficult for staff to administratively approve water for a workforce housing project. So that's one of the main messages I want to make sure that you hear from a staff perspective today. And I think even council would like this guidance. What does it look like? How is it determined to actually fall within this category? Some of the other ideas I had is that if we are negotiating development agreements with developers, that the workforce housing be considered as part of bigger projects, like that there be a component, right? That would have to be something that in the agreement the developer would be held accountable to do. My experience is that the things that are more difficult to do, they put off till the end, and then a lot of times they'll ask for it to be something different because it's not possible to do it. I've seen that a couple of times with different developments where they promise, for example, that they would build commercial and residential, and it would be a mixed-use development. Well, at the end of the day, they couldn't get a grocery store, they couldn't get retail, so they came back and asked it to be rezoned to residential, and it was. And there ended up being no commercial component. There's no mixed-use component. There has to be strong enough language in these agreements to obligate it and not allow them to get out of it. And that's something that I would ask you to consider when you're looking at bigger projects. But workforce housing is only going to happen if you have partnerships. I'm sure you already know that. But one of those partners can be developers. It can be a developer if they're truly, their heart is in building workforce housing as part of their project, but there have to be steps along the way that hold them accountable. They can't get all the way to the end and then say, well, that just really didn't work out for us. You have to have those thresholds at 20% build out, 40% build out, 60% build out, and they can't keep going until they fulfill these obligations first. You can't let them get all the way to the end before they say it's not possible. That's one of the observations I've made over time.
That's a helpful observation.
The other issue with that, though, is that's a one-generation description for workforce. What happens when the house gets sold to the next buyer? That's where we're really stumbling too, because the developer's gone.
Sure,
There's nobody to regulate that now,
right.
and now it's no longer workforce. So it's a one-generation deal and gone. Not going to work.
Agreed, but it does get your first generation in the door, doesn't it? If you get your first generation in the door, and that's the goal, right? Because even somebody who buys a house as part of workforce housing should have the ability to improve their life over time and use that as their first step and move on to the next thing and move on to the next thing. But that's up for all of you to decide.
I think that could be one component. You could say we need workforce apartments, we need workforce houses that people can resell and, put their own sweat equity into. They can make that improvement and move on to the next house. But I think you're right. That's not the be all end all. It's part of the grand solution.
One of the things, again, we talked a lot about fair housing and some of the things that we all have to comply with. I'm going to give you an example, Randy, of what, especially if you're going to be tapping into some government funding that's become available for workforce housing. We had an apartment complex right over here on White Spar that took advantage of some of those tax breaks, and the end was 20 years. They've now satisfied their 20 years. They pretty much raised the price. A lot of people were evicted out of there, and now it's going to go to market rate. So, there are strings attached to some of this stuff. The other thing I'd like to see, and this will be Michael, the government has defined workforce housing. We probably need to see a copy of what the government has said constitutes workforce housing. And I think anybody that's going to get involved in that needs to be aware of it, because once you comply with the definition of workforce housing, that gives the city, and I think we as a city probably need to adopt that as well. I don't know where Chelsea went, but we need to be aware of the definition from the government's eyes of what workforce housing is, because again, we've talked about a model for workforce housing, which is basically the government grants. That's some of the profit. That's how you're going to be able to offset what the person doing the workforce housing is actually going to make. It's going to be through the grant process, and there's lots of money out there right now for workforce housing, but you got to fit within that definition of workforce housing in order to tap into that. So be aware of that, and I think we should look into it as a city of having that available to anybody walking through the doors of ComDev, producing a plan that they're saying is workforce housing.
Absolutely. I've had many conversations with the Arizona Department of Housing and what they're doing. That's true. There's a property on White Spar that's, for seniors that's going out of that window where they're able to go to market rates. I think it was, like the Mayor Pro Tem said, 20 years. That they had to keep it at affordable for seniors. They're looking at it now, those LIHTC, those low-income housing tax credits, they're pushing out to 30 to 40 years. You have to be in that window. So, it is what it is, but that's how they're looking at it. They don't want to see any more 15 to 20 year, time frames.
And, we are inviting in, and Amber, I don't know if you have the schedule, a representative from a company called Gorman who has this model, and they've been very successful, and they're going throughout the United States building some of these, and then she'll also talk to you about how that company has made it profitable to be able to do this. Because, but again, if you stay within the confines of what the government has defined, you'll be able to tap into a lot more of that grant funding. And that's really where you have to go. Because as we've already established, and Randy's done it now in a profile, where does the profit margin come from?
I just wanted to go back, Connie, to what you were saying about defining workforce housing. It's my understanding as a committee that we've clearly defined that it's serving people between 60 and 120% AMI, which could be a variety of different housing types. Is that what you're referring
Well,
to?
No, and I think, Michael, you can probably speak to this, being involved with the HUD program and the block grant. No, it has a lot to do with the size, the cost, the building materials. There is a definition for the actual structure. It's not just who can tap into this money in terms of a purchaser. It's about the actual structure. So you can't build the Taj Mahal and call it workforce housing just because you call it workforce housing. There is a definition to that. And so, I don't know, do you have that handy, Michael? Are you well versed?
No,
in it?
I'll
But
go
that-
back.
Sorry, Michael,
look it
but
up. Yep.
sorry to interrupt, but that's only, we're just to clarify, that's only if we're only seeking HUD federal money.
That's correct.
So I think as a workforce housing committee, we looked at the parameters of what does the government, federal government say about workforce housing. We mulled over all that, right? We kind of gone through that as a committee. And then we realized, or I think we determined that for this community, for regionally, City of Prescott or regionally, however you want to put it, that we were at 60 to 120. The defining, we just have to be careful because I think as soon as you go the route of, well, let's make everything that we're doing here to appease HUD, right, I don't think, I mean, unless I'm horribly wrong, I don't think is really the goal. I think that's a avenue that a developer can come and say, hey, we're a light tech developer, right? And we know this game really well. We know the costs, the definition, all that. That's one channel for sure.
It's an option.
It's an option. Yeah, it's an avenue I think that we're, of course, open to. And we're not saying we're closing that door. I just think we have to be careful to, try so hard to go on the public side to define what we want because there's a lot of strings attached with that. Sorry to cut you off.
That's correct with HUD money. That is absolutely correct. So, no, but down the line was my understanding that we would look at some of those options, LIHTC, and like the Mayor Pro Tem said, Gorman is an example of an outfit that does it quite a bit. So,
Yeah, and let me give you an example. On a project they did in, I think it was in New Mexico, they had every single impact fee picked up. And it was, $70,000 worth of impact fees. So it is definitely worth looking into when you start to pencil out the bottom line.
So we can definitely talk about HUD and all of that in the future, but right now we do have to get back to the water policy specific because we also have the USD project to get to. But we'll definitely discuss, and in our future agenda items, we are talking about the Gorman situation. We can bring more information in the future about HUD.
Yeah, Gwen, you still have more to share with us for the presentation on the water policy, or are you
Not
open
for
for
water
questions?
policy.
Okay.
I mean, obviously that there's like 15 or 16 policies, and when it comes to actually building homes, it's pretty straightforward,
Yeah.
right? But if you want to save time, keep under the 8.
Gotcha. Any questions on water stuff before we move on to the PUSD project? Okay.
Actually,
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned the limit of 8. Is there such a number for multifamily?
There is. So it's 0.12 per unit up to 1.5 acre feet.
Okay.
So single-family homes on average, so the city has a water resource management model, and we call it the WORM. And every single water meter in the city is tracked through the WORM, and we know the citywide average for a single-family home is 0.17 acre feet per home, and for multifamily is 0.12. So it's that number up to 1.5. I haven't done the math.
Okay, I guess you were saying 8 would be the number of single-family homes that would be exempt from this process. Is there such a translation from, is it 4 multifamily?
12.
Does that exist?
There you go.
Okay,
12.
12, okay.
Yeah, we just have to do
Thanks.
the math.
Okay,
In my head.
I wasn't
Right.
following fully. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's the 1.5 acre feet is the threshold.
Okay.
And we use the 0.17 multiplier for single family and the 0.12 for multifamily. And then we have other multipliers for other types of uses, but that's the residential piece. Yeah.
Sorry, Gwen. You led with this, and I missed the second part of it. So originally you were talking about private contracts between City of Prescott developers are probably the, I guess, enforceable, easiest. It's just like, hey, we told you we're giving you water, and council approves it, and it's signed. It's a no-brainer.
Right.
The third one was maybe an amendment to the current policy or a new policy. What was the second one that you mentioned?
You can, if you have rules and regulations related to workforce housing in city code. So if you codified the rules for workforce
Oh,
housing.
I see. Okay.
It wouldn't be subject to policy, because remember the hierarchy, right?
Gotcha.
So as councils come and go, the water policy has changed dramatically over time. It swings both directions depending on whether you have a more conservative council or less conservative council. And so if you codify something, that's a much more extensive process to change than policy. Policy is simply approved by council through unanimous vote. Code requires ordinance change, public hearings sometimes. It is a more extensive process where the public is involved in
I
code
gotcha.
changes. So that would be a more solid way to
Perfect.
enforce those rules.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I think if you don't mind, we would love to hear about the PUST project.
Yeah, I think the PUSD project was kind of a win-win, and again, it was a huge partnership between the contractor, the school district. The school district kind of was the lead on that. They got a grant from the state to build some workforce housing. I believe it was $500,000 they got. And they came to the city and they said, you know, we'd like to implement this. They had a very short time frame, because they wanted to do it in the summer months before school started. And they said, how can you help us, city, facilitate this? And so I will say right off the bat that the school district had to pay impact fees. Just so you know, even for that project, they had to pay. We waived every other fee that we had, but they had to pay the impact fees. So the first thing we did was look at all their school sites, because Taylor Hicks wasn't necessarily where they were thinking they would go until we started evaluating each of the potential sites where they thought they would have room for them. But Taylor Hicks turned out to be the best solution, because we had a sewer main that literally ran through. We had just built it like 3 years before. So we actually, the reason that the houses aren't lined up all straight in a line is because they can't be over the top of the sewer main. So we actually strategically located them so they were not on top of the sewer main. But because it was already there, we only had to build the taps for the sewer connections for the homes. The water was in the street. I think it was on Demers, and we pulled a small water extension. The partnership was that the city paid for the design and the construction of the water main and the sewer taps, and the school district paid for the homes and the impact fees. So that was the partnership that happened. When we were discussing how we could most efficiently do the project, we discussed a master meter versus individual meters for the homes. But at the end of the day, the master meter impact fees would have been, they would have really stopped the whole project. They were over $150,000. So we went with individual meters on the homes, which is easier for the person that's going to manage the homes and manage the property. You know, they don't have to divide water bills up and things like that. So that turned out to work out pretty well. In terms of time savings, we hired the same engineer that was doing some other work for the school district on that site, and they were able to expedite the time frame in which they pulled together the engineering plans for the water main extension and the sewer connections. In addition, Kimley Horn was a partner in this project. They reduced their fees to give us some cost savings to the city and to the project overall. We ended up paying them about $38,000 for the design, which is quite low. And as well as the post-design services was another $18,000. So that for that project. And then because of the time limitations, we did not publicly bid the installation of the infrastructure, we use what's called a job order contracting procurement method, which is in state statute, which pre-qualifies different types of contractors around the state. You can choose from that, but it's unit pricing, so it's not always the lowest cost, but it's the most time efficient way to build. And so we hired Fan Contracting. It was about $448,000 to build that water line, do the sewer connections, the water connections for 6 homes. So 48,000 divided by 6, right? So in terms of time, it was the most expeditious way to make it happen, and we did open before school opened. That's kind of the skinny of how it worked out. Everyone saw it as a win, I think. But it was really tight to get that done in just a few months. Yeah. And before John was ready to bring in the houses, and we're like, we're not quite done yet. You can't bring the houses. We haven't closed the trench, that sort of thing. So, yeah.
No.
Building infrastructure is a time-consuming. It's not as fast as building houses.
Do you happen to have the number on the total price per square foot when everything was said and done?
I do not.
Okay.
I think the school might.
The school might,
Yeah,
yeah.
the
The
school
school might,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, Gwen, it wouldn't hurt to reiterate too, but in that partnership, the city of Prescott paid for what again? So the construction plan, the engineering?
Yeah, the engineering and the construction of all of the horizontal infrastructure. So that was the water, the sewer,
Infrastructure, yeah.
and then the service connections to the homes. Yeah, the sewer service connections alone were $72,000, and the rest was all the water.
72,000 was what, sorry?
The sewer connections,
yep.
yeah. And all we did was build service connections, because the main was already there, but we had to build a water main. It's a dead-end line that just serves these 6 homes.
And then PUSD, on that same vein, paid for impact fees
And the homes.
and the homes, yep.
Yeah. The city, I don't know who paid for APS or gas. That part I don't know.
What was the total cost of the city?
$500,000 or $55,000, $555,000 about for everything. That doesn't include staff time. That's just contracts.
Did you charge staff time to it or no?
We do, but I didn't bring those numbers with me. We do that automatically.
How much?
92,000 a house. 92.5 a house.
Gwen, how much faster? I had the privilege of being a part of that project, but I just wondered also, like Kimley was awesome because they were, they kind of got roped into it first, be like, hey, do you guys want to be a part of this? And they actually were the catalyst of getting things going really fast because they did. They're like, we'll start drafting this like next week. And we're like, what?
Yeah.
So I know that they had a lot to do with it because even Andrew at Kimley Horn's like, well, we do a lot of work with the city and stuff. And I'll tell you right now, this could have taken 4 times as long
Yeah.
just to draft. So I guess for me in that project, can you share what the difference in time savings was from your perspective in the chair you sit in Public Works compared to, say, if that would have been a water main and some sewer taps that you would have done at a city, what time difference are we looking at here?
I have no doubt it probably would have been in the following year.
Okay.
Like it would have been, if we would have followed our
Just
normal
procedures.
process
Yeah.
where we go out and we qualify an engineer and then we draft a scope for an engineer and, so our staff was directing things outside of how we would normally do because we knew the time was the issue before we started school. And, it was put at the front of the line, right? We did several meetings with Kimley Horn, like tabletop reviews and said, they would tell us what their obstacles were and we would brainstorm how to get around that so they could keep going because we needed that design before we could start construction and we knew we needed so many days of construction, right? I think we were in construction about 40 days to build just that water line and those sewer connections, right? So, again, it's not something that happens quickly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so a year. So for
Yeah,
sure, a year.
If it had been
like
on our
next year.
normal project
Okay.
list, it probably would have taken us a year to go from
do what you
design
did in
through
40
construction, which what we did in like 4 months
Okay.
for the school district, yeah.
Okay. And then, and sorry, Luther, we'll go next to you right now.
Sorry.
The last thing is, so you mentioned that it went to the top of the line. I would assume that that was based off like city leadership, whether that be council, city manager, right?
Yes.
There had to be that,
It-
that very clear understanding of like, we're trying to do this with the school, we're partnering with them, this is a highest priority. for
Council
Public
made it
Works.
a priority,
Okay.
which makes it a staff priority.
Gotcha.
You're good, man.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Is
Thanks
that-
for dealing with me.
Is that process that you guys went through to make that expedited time frame, is that something that could be applied to all projects? Is that because you were able to work hand in glove, the in-person meetings like we were talking about earlier, I guess my question is, did COVID screw everything up to where we do everything online now and that actually makes everything slower? Can we do more things in person now? Are we allowed?
You know, we all survived COVID, but at some point we have to start blaming COVID for, changes in our life. But the city was always headed toward online work. I think online work actually expedites our work in a lot of ways. The manhandle, some of the plans, that come in are this big around. I mean, the constant and having to physically move them from one person's office to another person's office. Public Works is not in the same building with ComDev. Fire's in a different building. The staff is in different locations in the city. So I actually think online permitting has actually sped things up. And the software we use allows more than one person to be in it at a time. It's really about workflow that's coming through the city at any given time. And we don't prioritize one kind of project over another. So even though one might be simpler, if it's in line behind a really big one, it has to wait, right? Because every project is important.
Right.
And if you push the big ones down, they'll never get done, right? So it's not really about the fact that electronic made things slower. It's just the workload that we have. And the fact that I know it can be faster in other communities that aren't that far from us, but we're different. Okay, we're on a hill, we're next to a national forest, we have significant creeks and floodplains that run through our community. These are not conditions that are necessarily shared by our neighboring communities. And so plan reviews take longer here. It's just the reality of where we live and the kinds of things that we're looking at. So, and then again, it has to do with how many permits are coming through at any given time. But when council identifies a specific project and says this is a priority, we put it at the front of the line.
Gotcha.
But I do believe, and I did just ask about this a couple months ago, that you can come into the counter. Is that right, George? If you have the need to come into the counter.
Yeah.
Because I do know, I've talked about this with ComDev for quite a long time. There are smaller companies that have not geared up to the online thing. They either don't know how to do it, they don't have the office help. So we've tried to keep an avenue of that open.
We have always allowed customers to come in and talk to us, even during COVID. The problem we run into is with the electronic software, for review purposes, you can't separate out a manual review. So even those few, and there's very few left who can't do the electronic process, we help them do the electronic process. We'll scan their plans for them and we'll fill out the forms for them, but it all goes into the electronic review process.
Let me ask a quick question based on what you just said. What if let's hypothetically say he's got a project, he wants to come forward to save time to get through our plan checking. Would they have the ability to subcontract out to a firm that would do do all the plan checking?
To the review, yes. We've actually initiated a third-party review process.
Okay.
So typically, it's going to be more beneficial for larger projects as a time savings to have a separate dedicated reviewer instead of, as Gwen was describing, being in line If you hire your own reviewer, you're in front of the line because
You're done.
Right. That process is in place. We have one project that I believe is in right now.
Yeah, and
working
didn't-
through that process.
Didn't we
It
do
may not
this?
be financially viable for a small project just
Right.
because you have to pay this reviewer and you pay the city for part of our administrative fee because we still have to handle part of it. But for larger projects, absolutely.
And we've done this in the past. I mean, this is not new to the city.
Yeah.
Do we have any follow-up questions or anything concerning PUSD project? Okay. Public comment? Are we good for public comment? Okay, yeah, sure. We'll have a quick public comment here. Please state your name for the record.
Howard Mechanic. I came here to comment on the water, but I wanted to first comment on a couple other things that were discussed, because I know Connie had mentioned it would save a lot of money if you're already infill, for infill projects, and that put in my mind, it would save a lot of money. And I know a lot of your discussions is how to get around impact fees. Well, the way to get impact fees just came in my mind is you redevelop a project that's already there, that already paid the impact fees. I know in the Valley, they're taking a lot of office buildings, which have a lot of vacancies since COVID. They're converting those offices to apartments. If the water use is similar to the previous water use, then there wouldn't be any impact fee paid. I'm suggesting that the committee put on a future agenda a discussion about a requirement in the city for new development having a certain percentage for workforce housing. As you all know, we need workforce housing, and we need to have a requirement, I think, to do that. I don't think the city is going to get as many units just through subsidies as you can get through this type of requirement, but I think there at least needs to be a discussion, a serious discussion of how other communities do it, because other communities do require a certain percentage for workforce housing. As far as a discussion about definition of workforce housing, and Nicole mentioned that you do have a definition for the income level, but you don't have a definition, as Connie mentioned, what type of structure. Now, if you have a tiny home, I think of 350 square feet, I think that would qualify as workforce housing for one person and maybe two people, but it wouldn't qualify for workforce housing for a family of four. So I'm suggesting you have a definition for certain size families as far as what square footage, what number of bedrooms are required. There may be a definition, you talk about the government, I assume you're talking about the federal government. They have maybe a definition, but you don't have to go with that definition. You can create your own definition, how many bedrooms and how big a family. As far as the time element, I think we need at least 30 or 40 years. And Randy mentioned that there's no way to enforce it after the first sale. I disagree on that. Somebody can buy a house and sell it in a year, and then you're losing it as workforce housing. No, we can't go with that. And I don't think you can require a person who buys a house to sign a contract that they're going to be there for 30 years either. They may have life changes. There are ways to enforce that a unit will be used for workforce housing for 30 or 40 years. There are ways to enforce that.
One more minute, Howard.
As far as, well, I didn't know we had time limits here.
We just run really late on the other agenda items, Howard, so if you don't mind
Okay.
to wrap up in a minute.
As far as the water, I just want to say the city can set aside a certain amount of water for workforce housing. It's very limited, the amount of city water that's available. If the city has a large margin of water that is defined only for workforce housing, and it restricts the other amount of water that's available for general housing, then builders will be more interested. If they want to build, they're going to need to go to that workforce housing water allocation. So I think this committee should discuss that and see if it wants to suggest that to council. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. All right, let's move on to item 4, update staff announcements. Either Michael or Amber, either one of you.
Sorry, we should have future agenda items, which kind of flows into
Oh, I'm sorry.
that too.
You're right,
That's
3D. Yep, future agenda item.
Say, dude.
So
We're just skipping one.
yeah, it's
Thanks.
on the future agenda item, we do have for Gorman to come speak. Sorry, you moved seats. And then we also had a request from Don Michaelman, who sits on the Habitat for Humanity Board, to come and present some ideas to the committee in September as well. And then a more in-depth look at Member Goodman's project idea as well, with the things we've learned today and the additional information we'll get from Public Works and Community Development to look into that more as well. Is everybody okay with those options for the September meeting? Is there anything else that,
I have a couple of comments about this, though, to the committee.
yeah,
I really encourage you to read it, please, and especially the city side on number 5, the benefit, and then number 9. The number 9 is kind of the meat and potatoes of this thing. We're kind of in trouble here a little bit, and a couple of comments, then we'll discuss it next time, but there's no land element in this. There's no land cost in this. I don't care if you're building a house, houses to sell or apartments to rent. If the math doesn't work, the math doesn't work. And so far, it's not working, and that's where I need your guys' help to come up with some ideas on the next agenda meeting. So I really want to thank George. He's put a lot of time in on it with me. My designer came up with these 3 proposals for plan. A is the one you prefer, correct?
It's the closest to meeting code.
Okay, closest to working. Let's work it
Not
that
like
way.
personally.
The other thing is, guys, I told you this before, I have this floor plan.
Yeah.
I'd like to invite you, if you'd like to take a field trip and come and walk it. I have unfortunately some empty apartments with this floor plan, unfortunately. And then Sandy reached out to staff wanting to present to some builders, some potential developers to do this. And I don't discourage that, I just think it's premature. I wanted to get first George's input and now yours.
Yep.
And then we can finalize, and then if it's appropriate, we'll go that route.
Sounds
That's
good.
about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think on future agenda items, and I'm sorry, Gwen, I totally skipped over it. Thank you so much for being here and your time. Very helpful. Yeah, thank you so much for all your answers and taking the heat for a little bit. So future agenda, one of the kind of underlying patterns that keep coming up here is we can define workforce housing and put a median income amount. We can define structures and whatnot. Enforceability and accountability is really where the rubber meets the road. So I don't know if it's too much. Amber, I'll probably leave this to you. If you think this is a packed meeting, just with this already, that's fine. But I do want to just comment that we do have to get legal suggestions and opinions of what, for example, what that legal agreement would look like. Is it a development agreement and it's that simple? Can we boilerplate an agreement for workforce housing where you say, okay, you're coming in here and we're going to waive fees and you're going to get the benefits of a water policy to help you get some water and all these things, right, Corinne? Because to your point, you brought that up. And it's like, but now legally, this is what you are bound to, right? So for example, I come in and we're like, yeah, we're going to be at $300,000 homes. And I like to go through this workforce housing process. And it's like, cool, we're going to expedite things. We're going to waive the fees, not impact fees.
So I'm going to say something that's going to be music to your ears.
Oh, man.
The way I heard the motion earlier is you're the chairman now of this committee. So guess who sets the agenda? you. So let's not talk about the substantive portions of your thoughts, but talk with your liaison and we'll get it on an agenda if that's something you
Okay.
want to talk about.
Yeah, I think that's huge to talk about that.
Well, hey, John, real
She'll
quick.
coordinate with us and we'll make it happen.
Okay.
I wanted to say the thing that I'm working on, I'm not trying to ramrod it. I'm not trying to make a thing for me. It was more of an exercise to see if I could make it work. Okay,
Real
guys, I want you all to understand that. This is just, let's get our feet dirty and see if we can make it work. And so far, I'm not doing too good. So that's it. That's why I did this. Do we ever
I
develop?
mean,
this
you're
is
not
ever-
doing too good even with 100% financing and 0% interest?
My business partners, my business
Is that
partners
what-
want to
I
have
feel like
nothing
that's
to
what he
do with
said.
this.
Okay.
But no, I think as a community service, I'm interested. Yeah, just my share. We all got to step up and do. He's been prosperous here. Mike's done really well. I've done well. We got to give back.
Yeah. So because we're in the theme of like fees, public works, water, and all that, is your outline of this project essentially kind of the standard? I'm assuming you look back at your project and took kind of your impact fees, review, inspection,
Right.
engineering, all that. So just to
Yeah.
be clear, those are all baked into this outline.
Well, what I did is I used it.
And I'm going to just hop in and say, stick to your agenda. This will be on the future agenda, and then at that point, you have the larger discussion.
Sure.
Because the public will be invited out if they're interested in this.
Gotcha.
So it's an open.
That's
meeting
fine. So
law.
for now, we'll read it.
Just read it.
We'll read it and we'll
Yeah.
come back to it.
Thank you.
All right. Are we good, Amber, with the future agenda stuff?
Yep.
Anything else for that? All right. And then just updates and staff announcements. 4A.
We'll give a brief, if you're okay with it, I'll have Mike give an update on the trust fund, and then we'll just do a brief talk about the terms coming up.
Okay, the update on the grant, where we're at right now, is the needs assessment. We are coordinating with Prescott Valley and Stephanie Robinson. We've already had one interview together with a consultant that'll help us with the needs assessment piece. We have two more that are being scheduled. Time frame of when we select our bid, next 30 days, next 60 days, I would say, conservatively. So that's where we're at with that. Any questions about, and again, we're just talking about the needs assessment. I would say, the goal with coordinating with Prescott Valley is we budgeted 60,000 for the needs assessment. Our goal is, it coming in cheaper, maybe 30, maybe 40, I don't know. It coming in cheaper, we're able to utilize more of the rest of the grant, which was for 200,000 for a facilitator, either permanent or a part-time.
So Mike, you're saying the bids have all come in, all three bids?
No, with no bids have come in yet. We're still interviewing the consultant. So, again, I think within the next 30 days, I'm saying 60 days, just a little wiggle room, a lot of vacations. So,
Michael, just for the benefit of the listeners, can you give a little background on that?
on
Just,
the
just start from the
grant.
top and about the grant. Just
Right.
the amount, when you got it, what the terms are.
Absolutely. So this grant is the Arizona Department of Housing grant. The total grant that we were awarded is $200,000. For that, we have a contract with ADO, where a portion of that goes towards a needs assessment, a housing needs assessment, kind of to see what we got in the community, what's going on. And then the majority of that grant is really meant for planning and implementation of a housing plan, a workforce housing plan. So that's the gist.
Thank you.
Yes.
And our hope is, because I know that the committee wants to recommend or has voted to recommend to council a person. So what our hope is, as soon as we get the bids and know exactly how much we're looking at, we can go to council later this year and say, okay, we have the assessment, we have the bids, this is what we're doing. Now we need your direction can we have a full-time person? If not, can we get a consultant to do it? So we're hoping to do that maybe November,
After elections.
after elections.
So 60 days before you think we'll have someone chosen for the consultant, how long until the needs assessment's completed, do you think?
The due date is March of 2025. Will be the needs assessment piece being completed.
It's always the joke. Yeah.
No, that is not that is not a joke.
Okay.
All right.
Oh my gosh.
So it's going to be a fast couple years. But-
Volunteer this committee to be the needs assessment consultant. We'll just provide all the information. Anything else, or can we just compile the entire binder and then just hand it over?
We can do that.
The other part regarding the facilitator, we don't have to wait until the needs assessment is complete to get a facilitator on board.
All right.
So
Good. Anything else, Andy?
just the 3 terms that are coming up that'll get posted in December to be filled in May are Kraxberger, Teeters, and Urias. You can all reapply, and then it's up to the subcommittee on appointments of who gets to fill the vacant positions. And then the next December is when if I remember right, the remaining ones will be posted to start the next cycle.
I thought we had a 4-year term.
I did too.
Okay, so it might be the December after that. But this go around, it's just those 3. Yeah, sorry. So your terms, the other 4 will expire in May of 2027, so they'll be posted in December of 26. So
Got a ways to go.
My gosh. All right. Cool.
start planning. I know. It goes by fast.
Yeah, long-term planning. All right, are we good with update staff announcements?
Yep.
Okay. All right, well, thanks for everybody being here. This meeting's adjourned.
Good job, Don.
Yeah.